Hello and welcome. Here is a situation for you. You are planning your dream vacation or working on taking another check mark off your bucket list to a great city in the United States. Do you ever reference a crime report for that destination? Some folks might, some don't. It's their bucket list after all, right? The FBI's latest annual crime report has good news. Violent crimes and especially murders dropped in 2023. The most recent data suggests that this trend has continued for this year. What impact does this data have on you, your family, and your community? Well, this is your chance to delve deep and learn about it because some politicians and pundits are spreading false claims about crime waves and blaming criminal justice reforms. Well, how are reformers responding to this? That's one of the key questions, along with yours, that we'll be addressing at this special event by the Brennan Center for Justice and law enforcement leaders to reduce crime and incarceration. I'm Natalie Tennant, former West Virginia Secretary of State, and thanks for joining us. As we get started here, I have a few notes to share. The Brennan Center is a nonpartisan law and policy organization that works to repair, revitalize, and defend our systems of democracy and justice so they work for all Americans. And while we cannot support or oppose any candidate for office, we will offer you vigorous debates on the policies and positions that matter for our democracy. And civility is important to all of us. Those who post rude or inappropriate language in our message stream on YouTube will be removed from the conversation. We also ask you to follow along the conversation and input some too on social media with the hashtag Brennan Center Live and use the live closed captioning if you need it. Today, you can hear from an interesting group of panelists from the law enforcement leaders to reduce crime and incarceration. The LEL is a coalition of current and former leaders in law enforcement dedicated to curbing unnecessary incarceration while keeping our communities safe. It's a goal that we all can agree on. And we're lucky to have these experts with us here today to discuss how we can achieve it. First up, Denver District Attorney Beth McCann. She was elected the city's first woman district attorney in 2016. She previously served 4 terms as a Colorado state representative, and throughout her career, she has focused on championing criminal justice reforms, especially those aimed at young people. Next, we have Madison, Wisconsin's Chief of Police, Sean Barnes. He was appointed in 2021 and has worked in law enforcement for more than 20 years. He is hailed as a national leader in reducing crime and strengthening relationships between the police and the communities they serve. Rosemary Ruby Nadiri is a senior counsel in the Brennan Center's Justice Program and a manager of the Law Enforcement Leaders Project. She spent more than a decade working as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York and held various roles in the Department of Justice. Ames Growert is a senior counsel in the Brennan Center's Justice Program who focuses on researching crime trends and the impact that criminal justice reform policies have. So as you can probably tell, our speakers share a great passion for making our criminal justice system fair and our communities safer. And of course, we want to include you too. So please ask your questions in the chat. We'll ask some of them as we move along in the conversation, and we'll have time later too. And because this is such an important topic, I'd like to share an edited version of an interview with an expert who couldn't join us today, but still wanted to contribute his insights. Last week, I spoke with crime data expert Jeff Asher about the FBI's latest annual report that I talked about and what that data reveals about crime trends so far this year. So here is some of that discussion. Right off the bat, what does the latest data show about crime trends in 2023 and in 2024?
So the 2023 data, which was recently released by the FBI, shows a small decline in both violent and property crime nationwide. The murder decline is sort of the standout feature of the decline that the FBI data has pointed to. It showed an 11.6% decline in murder from 2022 to 2023, which is by far the largest one-year decline ever recorded in terms of both the percent change and the number of fewer murder victims from one year to the next. As far as 2024 goes, we have about 300 cities of data in the Real-Time Crime Index. showing murder down about 18% this year, 17 or 18% this year relative to last year at this point, with a slightly larger decline in violent crime and a much larger decline in property crime. The murder decline this year should eclipse last year as the single largest one-year decline, and put together will undoubtedly be the largest two-year decline ever recorded. What it means is generally for violent crime, we're roughly at this really low level in terms of the violent crime rate that we've been at for the last 10 years. And this is something that the FBI data shows. It's also something that the BJS, National Crime Victimization Survey, shows, which for 2023, BJS said that violent crime was not statistically different from what it was in 2019. So whatever happened in 2020 and 2021, we're basically back to the levels we were pre-COVID in terms of violent crime. Murder, we're probably roughly at or below where we were in 2019. Probably still a little bit above the murder rate from 2014 when it was at the lowest level ever recorded.
How do we know how reliable the data are? What then limitations should we anticipate also?
So when we talk about crime data, and hopefully it comes through when I talk about it, we have to talk in sort of estimative language. We have to give broad assessments. We can say that things are about where they were 10 years ago. We can say that the murder rate has come down substantially from where it was 30 in the 90s and 30 or so years ago. We can't say from the data exactly with 100% certainty how many robberies happened in the United States last year. We can only give an estimate, and estimates carry a little bit of uncertainty. And so we have to acknowledge that whenever we talk about crime data, we can acknowledge imperfection and we can acknowledge imprecision without suggesting that we can't accurately describe what the trends are in our understanding of what's happening. The question that a lot of people have raised are, like in 2021, when the FBI mandated the switch from the old system, SRS, to NIBRS, and about 40% of the country's population was not NIBRS compliant, was not covered by a NIBRS compliant agency. That led to 60-something% of the country making up the crime stats, which means that the FBI had to estimate 40% of the country. That's really hard to do. That carries a really large margin of error. If the FBI is missing historically about 5% of the country's population, last year they were missing, I think, 5.7% of the country's population. That's a lot easier to estimate.
Just one final question. This drives you, and you sound passionate about it. You're excited about this. Why did you focus so much of your analytical mind on criminal studies and criminal statistics?
Native New Orleanian. I was in DC for 7 years. I met my wife. My parents are here. My sister's here. I wanted to move back home and raise a family here. And New Orleans is a place where we don't really analyze things. And I apologize if people in the audience are from New Orleans, but we make decisions on anecdote. We make it on vibes and feelings. We make it on what historically we've done. We don't make a lot of good decisions based on data and statistics and understanding and analyzing things as they're actually happening. And so when I moved home, I was fortunate enough to get a job with the police department as the first analyst they'd had in decades.
So Jeff Asher with AH Datalytics, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, there we have it, and some good information from Jeff that many of you have worked with too. And again, thank you all for joining us, DA McCann, Chief Barnes, Ames, and Ruby. So we see that the data seems clear here and that crime is falling across the board. And Ames, this is a question that I always have, these numbers come to me. 2014 was the lowest, but we're measuring things from like pre-COVID and post-COVID. But my question has always been, why did we see a crime spike in 2020 during COVID? I thought we were all supposed to be huddled inside, planning our dinner for that evening. And some of these numbers are saying that crime went up in 2020.
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, I want to thank you for including me in this conversation. I'm thrilled to have a chance to partner with you again, Ruby, with law enforcement leaders, and to share the stage with DA McCann and Chief Barnes. I also want to thank Jeff for sharing his insight, and I strongly encourage our audience to follow his work. he's just finished building a tool called the Real-Time Crime Index, which you can go to that website and track up to the minute crime data and data over the last couple of years. It's a really good way to interact with both what's happening right now in crime trends, but to visualize for yourself exactly what we're talking about on this panel. And as Jeff just explained, his data shows most metrics of crime declining, both in 2023 and declining through 2024, with especially sharp declines in violent crime and murder. We know that from the FBI's crime data, but we also know it from other sources, from police data and from a variety of other sources. You can see it plain as day in Jeff's tool. This year, his tool, I just pulled it up to double check, shows violent crime down in the cities he tracks, which is a lot of cities, by 4%, murder down by 16%, property crime by 9%. But yes, to rewind to where we started, this is very different from where we were in 2020. Violent crime really did spike in 2020. At the same time, Natalie, you're right. We did see a decline in a lot of crimes that you associate with like foot traffic. So larcenies, burglaries, crimes like that fell off a cliff. They declined very quickly, just simply because it's hard to steal from a store when a store is closed. But interpersonal violence went up, and it went up very, very fast. So, why? We've been thinking about that for a while, and I think researchers will be studying this period of time for decades to come. And I mean that literally. We've spent time at the Brennan Center studying why crime declined during the 90s, and sociologists, criminologists don't have a firm answer yet. I think we don't have a firm answer here yet either, but I'll give you the best of what we know. So when the pandemic hit, many key government services closed. That includes programs that work to reduce violence or address needs like mental health and drug treatment. Key community spaces where people can safely congregate outside of work and the home. You might hear the term third places. That's what this refers to. Places like parks, libraries, coffee shops, those all closed. At the same time, gun sales took off. And we know from speaking with communities affected by crime, people started carrying guns more and using them to resolve disputes. And when you use a gun to resolve a dispute, it is much more likely to end in death or serious injury, tragically. Low social trust, which I think a lot of us felt to some degree during the COVID-19 pandemic, didn't really help either. Communities need to be empowered to look after themselves. It's a fundamental principle of urbanism. Communities have to work with law enforcement, with police, together. It's a partnership. And that sort of work, communities keeping the peace on their own and in partnership with law enforcement, it's hard to do when everyone's inside. So what happened since? Why did we see such a sharp increase in interpersonal violence and now such a sharp decrease? Simply put, the sort of perfect storm of factors that I've just described receded. If you had a theory watching violence spike in 2020 and 2021 that the pandemic was a big part of what we were seeing, you're looking at the evidence now and you're feeling pretty good about that conclusion. And I should be clear, I'm talking about national trends here. There are a lot of places that defy the national increase in violence. Newark, New Jersey, for example, near my hometown, did not see an increase in violence, and many of our communities today are not seeing a decline. But I'm talking in national averages. As the pandemic receded, what we're seeing nationally is life returned close to normal. Violent crime has started to come down. Economic conditions have improved. People have returned to the streets. People are better able to look after each other. The community is better able to look after itself. At the same time, state governments and the federal government have poured resources into anti-violence programming. So the Biden administration especially has spent a lot of time and money thinking about community-led anti-violence programs and what governments can do to support those. These are really locally based initiatives that know what their communities need. They know how to deliver it. And the problem is they're very hard to stand up. They rely on they rely on people who know their communities like the back of their hand, and they're often under-resourced. So governments can help fix that by providing the resources they need. I think that's part of the story, but I think there's a lot more to talk about. We'll hear today. But I want to expand very quickly on a topic Jeff mentioned. How do we know that crime is really declining nationally? And the answer is we have multiple independent points of confirmation. It's not just the FBI data that we talked about, it's police data too. And I'd love to talk about that more as the panel goes on too.
Okay, we'll get to that a little bit too. Now, you mentioned the website that Jeff has worked on, and it's real time. We're putting it up in the chat, in the YouTube chat. It's realtimecrimeindex.com. It's a long name, but it all makes sense. Realtimecrimeindex.com. So, folks, after our talk here, you can go and play around with it. But I do want to get back and focus a little bit back on LEL. And every time I say LE, I have to think, oh, the law enforcement leaders, long name. And Ruby, this says you've been a part of this, and I want you to explain what it is that LEL does, and then when we say that we have accurate crime data factors, how does that work in with the coalition?
Yes, thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you, Ames, and Jeff for that great overview of where we are now with crime data. And it's really great to be on this panel also with DA McCann and Chief Barnes. The Law Enforcement Leaders to Reduce Crime Incarceration, LEL, as you mentioned, Natalie, is a project that was created by the Brennan Center for Justice in 2015. It's a project that I manage at the Brennan Center, and it brings together approximately 200 current and former law enforcement leaders from across the country, police chiefs, sheriffs, DAs, corrections leaders, like DA McCann and Chief Barnes, whom we're proud to have as members, who have come together because they believe that it is essential for public safety to both reduce incarceration as well as focus on reducing crime. They recognize from experience that the two are not in tension. And in fact, reducing incarceration and improving our justice system to make it fair and equitable for all Americans, as well as reducing and preventing crime, are all essential for public safety. Because they are law enforcement working on the ground and in communities, they know from experience that data and evidence and research are all critical to making positive impacts on public safety. They have really, by necessity, to operate on reality and with accurate facts and data rather than myths. But they also recognize that this type of accurate data is just the starting point, that listening to their communities and looking at the impacts of policies over time is also essential to bring real public safety. And often what they hear when they talk with their communities is that policing and prosecution are essential public safety tools, but punitive approaches that we've historically overused in our country aren't always the best response, and in fact are sometimes not even a good response to many of the problems that we place at law enforcement's door. They have costs. They're exorbitantly expensive. They also have serious personal and societal costs. They can be counterproductive, and they also exacerbate racial disparities. So what they hear from their communities and what the evidence and research shows that we need, accountability and punishment are essential for public safety, but so are policies that help to treat rather than simply punish mental health problems and substance addiction, that improve law enforcement's ability to investigate and clear and solve complex and violent crimes. And that sometimes requires a reallocation of training and resources within agencies, which are often now strapped for staffing, and also working with communities to build trust. That building trust with communities and engaging all members of their communities as partners in developing public safety solutions is also critical. That it's important to reduce racial disparities and to better support victims across the board, all victims, which our justice system has not historically done very well. And also to promote humane treatment and successful reentry in prison, because the vast majority of people who go into jails and prisons are going to return to communities. So education, employment, and other services to help them successfully reintegrate, to get jobs, to reunite with their families, to get education, and to be productive members of society is really important to reducing cycles of arrest and incarceration and reincarceration.
Right.
So that's why all of these things are important for public safety. And I'm sure you'll hear more about many of these initiatives and others from my fellow panelists. And I'm really excited to continue this conversation.
Yeah, and there's so much to talk about. I guess for me, coming from a Secretary of State standpoint too, is reenfranchising people too. When they're getting back in the community, make sure they have that right to vote too. And I think too, listening, and when I was first learning about LEL, I always thought this is really great because the law enforcement leaders bring the credibility. And Chief Barnes, it is an honor to have you here to talk. I've been working a lot and doing it and working with coalition groups on the voting side of my job as former Secretary of State. So I hear a lot about what's going on in Wisconsin. So it is an honor for you to be here, and thank you for giving your time to us. So kind of continue on what Ruby said and talk about some of the successful solutions that you've adopted during your 20-some years on the force. And then how do you measure whether you've had a positive impact on the community with some of those reforms or ideas that you have?
Yes, thank you, Natalie, and thank you to the Brennan Center for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with like-minded people. There are thousands of police officers just like me who really believe that we can create a safer society while at the same time creating a more just society. And in my 20 years, I've had the opportunity to work in 3 really great police departments that really had a sense of community, that really wanted to police in a different way. And that's why I'm so committed to policing today. One of the things that I've been involved in is the push for evidence-based policing practices, helping police departments understand how to collect data and then how to properly analyze that data. That also includes qualitative data, understanding how to really listen to the community and deliver the type of policing that we want. Here in Madison, we have a renewed focus. I came in 2020 at the height of that increase in crime. And it was very apparent to me when I came to Madison that what was missing was the collaboration. And that's a collaboration between the police department, between the community, between elected officials, and also between city government. And that's sometimes often missing. And one of the things that I will say is very beneficial to this conversation is that police departments have to work with other parts of the city. You can call it Team One, Team City, the best method approach, whatever you want to call it. But those are things that we know work because police officers, when they respond, they are often the first persons or the first people to identify problems. And this department, being fully committed to problem-oriented policing, we know that we have to look at the underlying issues that reach that point to where we were called. And so we do that with the process that we call stratified policing. We've taken some time to look at data, and we've taken some time to understand how crime behaves in our city. And every city can do the same thing. What are the crimes that your community believes are significant? Why are they significant, and what is leading to that? In many cities, you're suffering from the opioid crisis. We still have not truly got a handle on that, but we know that there are some things that are positive and that are showing promise. One of the things that we do here in Madison is we have a program called the Madison Area Recovery Initiative, or our MARI program. It's a program that's been evaluated several times, and there are several peer-reviewed articles about it. And essentially what we do is we try to give people an opportunity to participate in an intensive treatment program. And if they successfully complete that, we do not send their charges forward to the DA. Our DAs, along with DAs across the country, they are really busy. They don't always have the resources that they need. And so having these programs where we can divert people away from the criminal justice system and thus reduce the number of people we have to incarcerate is what every police chief should be looking at. We also have restorative justice. We have to look at those programs, especially around our young people who, when we send them to the court, may not get what they need. but we know that we have seen tremendous results from our restorative justice programs. Now, how do we measure success? For me, success is measured absolutely every single day. We have a robust crime analysis group here, and they submit reports. We have thresholds. What we mean is, when is a problem no longer a problem? And we evaluate and we analyze for that almost every single day. And there's a monthly meeting with me and my staff, and we go through those significant incidents. And the purpose of that meeting is to make sure we are providing each commander, each officer with the tools, training, and time they need in order to be successful. That's my definition of accountability. Our job as police leaders is really to make sure that we're policing in the way that the community expects, that we're doing a great job, that we're trying to partner with the community. And you will know if you're being successful in this business because someone will tell you about it, especially in a city as smart as Madison and as many other cities like Madison around the country. And so we want a team city approach, if you will. We want to make sure that we're partnering with other services, whether it's parks and recreation or whether it's sanitation. We know that we're not always the best persons, the best people to solve a problem simply because someone calls 911. And we're certainly committed to that. We're seeing this year some of the lowest numbers we've seen in the history of our police department. I'm very pleased to also say that we're seeing record numbers of reduced arrests. Year to date, our arrests of Black males has reduced by 55%. And when people ask me a simple question, how do you reduce racial disparities in the criminal justice system? I always say you have to begin by preventing crime. We're in the business of preventing crime. If we can prevent crime, prevent the opportunity for crimes to occur, you can reduce the number of people that you have to send to the district attorney's office.
Right. I mean, it's not, and just from the whole list of things that you've talked about, it's not one thing that solves a problem. It's all the working together, the collaboration. And have you had the opportunity yet to go on the website, realtimecrimeindex.com? You say that almost every day you measure it with your officers.
I have not been on that website, but I promise you we have our own internal with our
Yeah.
intranet. So we want to be able to provide, I call them products, to
Right.
our commanders. And so when commanders come in, they have their own dashboard, if you will. And so commanders and their lieutenants can come in every single day and look for things. So for our significant incidents, as Natalie, we have what's called a threshold. And our thresholds are 4 crimes occurring within a half a mile radius within 10 days of each other. And so the system will all automatically look for these type of crimes. But the good news is when that happens, a bulletin is produced. It has a list of resources. It has a list of community contacts so that everyone knows what happens. Now that list goes out to the entire department. So captains don't want their name to be on that list. So when it gets to 2 or maybe 1.5, we don't have to wait. People are already intervening. They're bringing the community in. We're doing a lot of community education, and we're trying to make sure that everyone knows what we're doing to keep them safe.
All right, I understand it then. All right, this is really good. I'm so interested in this. So, DA McCann, thank you for we're gonna be talking to you. But you've made this really your professional life's work, whether you were a lawmaker or a prosecutor on reforms, and especially dealing with juvenile reforms. So what are prosecutors doing to help address the criminal justice system?
Well, thank you so much, Natalie, and thanks to the Brennan Center for inviting me to be on this panel. It's really an interesting and certainly very relevant topic. So prosecutors across the country, I think, are looking at ways that we can improve the criminal justice system. And as the chief was saying, end up with fewer people in the system to begin with. And then if they do get charged with crime, are there alternatives to the traditional incarceration pathway that would be appropriate? So some of the things we do here in Denver, especially with juveniles, I have been very concerned about the rise in violent crime among young people. And, they're getting younger and younger. And I don't know if this is an issue in Madison, but we have definitely seen the level of violence increase. And so that's something that we've been focusing on. One of the things that we've done in conjunction with the courts is set up a program called HIP, Handgun Intervention Program. And what that program does is when we identify a young person, a juvenile that has been picked up with a gun, but they haven't used it yet, at least as far as we know, they can be screened to go into this program as an alternative. And it's a relatively short program. It's 7 weeks long. They meet in the evening once a week with a parent or guardian that's required. And they learn about a lot of aspects of what carrying a gun entails. For example, we have a doctor come in and talk about the reality of gunshot wounds. We have a mother who lost a son in a drive-by talk about the impact that has on her family, and things of that nature. And we also require them to make a presentation at the end where they talk about what they've learned and what they want to do in their future. So we are hoping that we are interrupting that behavior at an earlier point so that they don't continue that life of criminal activity and end up either shooting someone or getting shot themselves. And we probably don't do as good a job of measuring the success as I'd like to, due to some of the funding limitations, but we do monitor recidivism, which is kind of a traditional way of monitoring it. And so far we've been pretty successful in that arena. And then we also, as the chief was talking about, I started a restorative justice program here. We didn't have one before I came into office, and we've sent over 400 people through that program now. And our recidivism rate there is 3.6%, which is remarkable. In Colorado, the typical recidivism rate after a prison stay is about 50%. And for probation, it's about 17%. So I do think that these kinds of programs make a difference. And we have people that go through them tell us, you've really changed the way I view myself and where I fit. And one young woman told us she was going to go into criminal justice because of her experience. So I think that it's important, for prosecutors, it's easy to say, okay, we're just going to go through the normal process. You're going to get probation, or you're going to plead, you're going to go to jail or prison. And I'm trying to expand that view to really what is an appropriate case for an alternative disposition where we will be preventing future crime and really helping get that person back on track. So those are some of the things that we're doing. Mental health is always a big issue, substance abuse, mental health. And so we have now started competency courts in our district in Denver, both for misdemeanors and felonies. So that's an effort to get those people out of the system earlier and get them into restoration treatment or just mental health substance abuse treatment so that they don't clog up the system or end up in our jail, where we do have some mental health treatment options. But, it's unfortunate. You have to commit a crime to really get the treatment. So we're trying to start that at an earlier stage so that people don't end up in jail.
DA, it sounds like from both you and the chief that you have to be willing and you have to have courage, in a sense, to try other options and other solutions, because sometimes people think, oh, they should just go on down the road, like you mentioned, with the typical system. So that's what I think, from this point of view, that the LEL is so important, because the law enforcement leaders help each other out and show, well, you can do this. I'm going to try this too. So that's what I think is such a good program, and you can learn about it at the BrennanCenter.org. But I do want to get to a question, and it's kind of for all of you. This comes from an audience member. If the data clearly shows that crime is falling, then why are people susceptible to misinformation about crime getting worse? And what do you think it will take to make people believe these numbers? Now, that's an open question to all of you because you all face that in a sense. So
Sure. I'll take a stab at it.
Go ahead.
So I think crime rate and fear of crime are two different things. I think sometimes people, their lived experiences and what they have through vicarious trauma often resonates through community. And so it is incumbent of every police chief to have a robust communication strategy so that you can give the realities of what crime looks like in your city. I also think that it has been advantageous to play on people's fear of crime for political gain, and that should never happen. I think that crime and safety is so important to me and to what I do, that we do everything we can to give good information. The websites are great, the dashboards are great, but most community members, when they're sitting around the dinner table, they're not looking at data and crime statistics like we are. So it is incumbent of people like us to have these types of forums, to use the voice of the Brennan Center for Justice, to use the collective voices from our district attorney's office and anyone who is willing and able to tell the true story about where we are in this country on crime. I think we're certainly headed in the right direction. Hopefully, if there's time, we can talk about sustainability of this. But I do think that it's incumbent to have a very robust communication strategy so that misinformation and disinformation does not impede any progress.
Right. I mean, that's really a great point to that. And anyone want to add to that on what we can continue to do?
Well, I think at least in Denver, we've had quite a lot of issues around the homeless population. And then we also had a great influx of migrants coming in, and the press really talks about it a lot. And so, well, even the president talks about it in Aurora, Colorado, which is a sister city to us. But I think that when people see homeless people on the street, living on the street, or encampments, that just creates this atmosphere of fear and unknown. And so even though the crime rates are going down, if that's their perception, that becomes their reality. And I think our mayor has made a big effort of housing many of the homeless. So that is subsiding. But I went to a neighborhood meeting last night in downtown, and there's still this concern that people don't want to come downtown because they view it as where there are just a lot of homeless people and a lot of drugs. And so it is difficult. And, we can talk about the statistics, but if people don't feel it, it's not helpful. It doesn't convince them. So I think the more we can do to address homelessness and drug addiction and things of that nature that people see, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. The communication and the getting out there that the chief talks about. So Brennan Center folks, then the question to you is, what can the Brennan Center do as part communications hub? What is the Brennan Center planning to do, or I know you're always researching to try to find what the best impact might be. So go ahead, one of you.
I can start, and I can just, I will actually give a lot of kudos to my colleague Ames Croward for all the work that the Brennan Center has done. A lot of work on dispelling myths about crime and what kind of things about, for example, the idea that migrants have caused a crime wave, or that there has been this incredible bail reform, and a lot of things that Ames can go into. But I think even broader is sort of thinking about the context, the other context that needs to be talked about more, and that the Brennan Center has also done a lot of research on. And I kind of probably could do more on is the harms of the system itself, which I think, as both DA McCann and Chief Barnes alluded to, there is a reason that these leaders are thinking when they look at these problems in their communities that the punitive approach should not be the first resort, because there are harms to that. There's kind of repeated cycles of harm that are created by sending a person to prison or jail who has a drug addiction and that's not being addressed, or separating people, parents from their kids, and all of those other things, which is not to say that, that the accountability part is important, but it needs to be used in a much more limited way than we have been. And thinking about the costs of that system are also important. And the Brennan Center has done a lot of work on that, but could do more.
Yeah, and I'll say, Ames, you're right. Ames won't promote himself, but it's not just Ames. It's the whole justice program within the Brennan Center. But there is a series of reports and research that I encourage folks to go to, brennancenter.org, and you can just find all of that, and it kind of links together, so it's easy to it is easy to enjoyably get lost in, even for the elections person over here. But here's what I also wanted, as we talk about these reforms, because they're with such optimism to be able to come up and think of these, and you, the audience, you're asking great questions about this by asking, what are the biggest challenges that you've faced in implementing reforms, and what did you learn from them? And I think especially what you learn from them that others can imitate when they go to implement reforms. So I guess that's DA McCann. I'll let you go first this time.
Well, I will not sugarcoat it. It's not easy. Especially, I came in from the outside. I had been a DA, but many, many years ago, came in from the outside with this reform platform. And it took several years for me to gain the trust of the members of the office, as well as the police department. And even now, I know there are police officers who feel like we're not hard enough on crime or whatever. So it's not easy. I mean, we've seen DAs get recalled or lose elections over these kinds of issues. And I guess my advice is you do have to persevere, and you have to. My style is to go a little slowly and make smaller incremental changes, and bring people along for those, and then in the hiring process, focusing on people who are open to new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things. Other DAs have had a more aggressive approach, like Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, or George Gascon, and they've been successful in their approach as well. So I think it's has to be something that you're comfortable with, but you just have to persevere. You get you get negative op-ed columns, you get leaders. Sometimes I had the former police chief, opining about my administration and things of that nature. And you have to build your own coalitions and work with the community, get them supporting you, and you persevere, I guess.
And I guess, that's that's good advice, because that's with anything that you work on, even when folks don't realize how good it is. So, Chief, you face some of that also. You've been there like 2.5 years, right? In Madison.
3 years. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly faced the same thing, and I echo everything that the district attorney basically stated. But here's my advice. My personal philosophy is that people do not fear change; they fear loss. And so, in order to implement change, you first have to build or create a receptive capacity for change. The people who you're responsible for, are they ready? for change. And there's a process that you can go through to help them get ready. And part of that is by understanding that you do not lose anything when you go down the road of police reform. It makes your job safer. It makes your job more meaningful. I think a lot of times people think that police reform should make the job easy. Unfortunately, there is no easy fix to policing. It's simply not easy. Criminal justice in itself, whether corrections or in the district attorney's office, it's not an easy job, but it is a very meaningful one. And so making sure that people understand that you're not losing the core values of the profession by going down the road of reform. Another piece of advice I would say is you have to create a vision for what you want. People need to know where you're going with this. Are you enacting reforms simply to appease a small group of people, or do you truly believe in it? And if you believe in it, you have to create a shared vision for everyone. And we were able to do that here in Madison. We created, for the first time in the history of our department, a vision statement that we wanted to be a national model for exceptional policing through our commitment to selfless public service, effective community partnerships, and evidence-based policing. And we talked about measurement of success earlier. There is a measurement of success when every officer understands that vision statement. They may not be able to recite it verbatim, but they know selfless public service, community partnerships, and evidence-based policing. And it shows a commitment to where you are in implementing that particular change. And so I think you need to make sure that there's equity also in your workforce, and that reforms isn't the job of one particular group. We've done that in policing before with community policing, but when it comes to truly creating a police department that the community can be proud of, everyone has to be brought in, and it's very important that we do that. And then lastly is sustainability. There has to be some mechanisms in place to ensure that if I leave or the leader leaves, that what we've put in place will continue. Our restorative justice process is a city ordinance. The officers do not have a choice, even though they all support that particular program. And so sometimes you have to really show that you believe in these changes and that these changes are here to stay. We've been talking about a rise and decrease in crime since I was studying criminal justice as an undergraduate student back in the early 90s. Why do we keep going up and down? Because we haven't understood sustainability. And so if we're looking for an area to research, we need to research how can effective criminal justice reform be sustained over time.
That's a good, there's so many points in that. And I don't know if Ames and Ruby want to talk about sustainability, but that's right. That's the sign of a real leader. If people can carry on once you're gone, if things fall apart when you leave, then what kind of leadership was there really? But then I also liked your remark about expectation, that it's okay to expect things from people, and it's okay to have high expectations, and it makes you feel better in a sense. What do you all think about this? I'm going to get back to one of our audience questions, but what do you think about that research on sustainability? I think that sometimes egos might get in the way too, Chief, and DA McCann, this too, as new leaders come in, whether they're elected or appointed or, coming from somewhere else, it's like they have to prove themselves and they want to recreate the whole wheel, and it's not necessarily a good path.
Well, I would say one important thing is to secure the funding in your budget for the program. So often these programs have to be started through grants because they are new and they're more experimental, I guess. And so, but grants typically run out within 2 to 3 years. So fortunately for me, I've been able to get the funding put into my general fund budget for our restorative justice director and our diversion case managers. Now we're trying to move them from grant funded to general fund funding. So there is that piece, which is kind of a practical piece. But then I also think, like for me, since I will be I will be retiring in January. I have had many discussions with the man who will be replacing me. I know he will because he won the Democratic primary and there's no one running against him, about the programs. So I've introduced him to the people who are the leaders of the programs and invited him to community meetings where we're discussing the programs. And he has committed to me that he will continue them. Now, I don't have any actual control over that, but I think that because he's met the players and met the people that are involved, there's more likelihood that he will continue them. And so I think that's important for any leader to try to put in place those kinds of mechanisms that will keep those programs in place. Hopefully, I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, well, right there's a good study. If you have someone that you know is going to help to continue it, I'm sure there's a city out there where it's comparable. It would be comparable. Anybody else? I'm going to move on to another question from the audience, which is it's somewhat answered because people who are watching this or listening or care about these numbers. They want to know what they can do too, and that's what we want to leave folks with also. But they ask what individuals and communities do, and I guess Chief and DA, who did you work with when we talk about individuals and communities like the faith communities, education communities, those things? What did you ask of them to promote the change in the criminal justice system? What can folks do?
Do you want to try that, Chief? No.
Sure, I'll be very brief. I was appointed in December of 2020, right? Nothing going on here, right? Nothing to see. And our city had 180 straight days of protest. And so when I came in, the city and the community were very fractured. But I saw that as an opportunity. I felt like I had the lived experiences of being a young kid who grew up in community housing. I felt like I had the experience as a professional and 2 other police agencies. I had previously worked in civilian oversight. I was the director of training and professional development for the Civilian Office of Police Accountability in Chicago. So I knew that side of it as well. But I started meeting with some of the protesters. And we didn't meet in public. We did not meet out at a coffee shop. We met in a public defender's office, private office, after hours, and they wanted to tell me about their experiences in 2020 and why they were involved in protests and what they wanted to see and what they didn't see. And what I heard was they were concerned about a lot of things, including racism within policing in general. And that's something we don't talk about a lot. And what I told them is, I said, well, do you think the police department is racist? And they said, I don't know. And I said, well, I don't want a racist police department. And I said, what? I said, I want an anti-racist police department. I want to create a police department where you know exactly where we stand, that you know that we value diversity, equity, and inclusion, where you see people promoted and in specific ranks that are diverse, that looks like the community. You know where we stand on a variety of issues that have disproportionately affected Black people, specifically in Madison, being only 8% of the population, but accounting for over 50% of the arrest. And so there was a lot of work to be done there, and I was willing to have those conversations. And what I will say to leaders who want to do this, you have to be able to take a hit, because not all of those conversations were nice. Not all of those conversations made me feel good, but you have to be willing to listen to your community and take a hit and keep moving before you can start those partnerships.
Yeah, and I would echo that. Working with community members is really important. And for our restorative justice program, we contract with a neighborhood organization that does conflict resolution. So I think the more you can partner with outside agencies, our diversion program partners with a number of outside service providers, therapists, and we specifically look for professional therapists of color or that serve people of color to try to make sure that there is a better relationship between the therapist and the client or the juvenile or adult who's in the system. But as far as what individuals can do, I think volunteering, even with shelters, volunteering so you get involved in the community and begin to understand what some of the issues are. And then you can also often volunteer with police departments or DA's offices sometimes. And here in Denver, the police department in each district has a monthly meeting with community members. So, attending those, listening, we do a community advisory academy twice a year where we bring community members to learn about what the DA's office does and we get their feedback. So I think participating in your community is really important, just to get to understand the issues and participate that way.
You're on mute.
Yep. As we finish things up here, I want to ask some kind of a final question as we walk away from this and think about this. I have so much to think about myself, and it is, what is the one thing that you would like our audience to walk away with this afternoon and continue to think about? And Ames, I might even start with you. So go ahead. I know I should start with our guest first, but I'm going to go ahead with you. You've been there. Go ahead.
Happy to. Yeah, I'll keep it brief too. So I want to talk about something Ruby mentioned during one of her remarks. So, we've heard a lot about really important reforms to, make our community safer, make our justice system fairer. Unfortunately, we also know, I think members of our audience know, that people pursuing these important reforms can come under attack or criticism more often than not unfairly. So something that we've been hard at work in the justice program, and a team-wide effort, one that Ruby's participated in, and pretty much everyone on the team, is we've been publishing a series of pieces explaining how we really can have justice and safety together. There doesn't have to be a trade-off between criminal justice reform that makes our communities fairer and public safety. We really can do both. I know there's a link that we dropped in the chat where you can read analyses touching on everything from bail reform to progressive prosecutors to immigration and crime to retail theft, which actually was a fascinating piece to write. I encourage you to read those pieces, share them with friends and family. We hope to get the word out about how important it is to build safety and fairness as a joint project. And thank you very much. I hope that's what I hope people leave with.
Yeah, very, very good. Okay, DA McCann, please go ahead.
Well, I think for me, I hope people will leave with the idea that criminal justice reform is a good thing, that we are making progress, that we do need to be looking at how do we prevent people from getting into the system, and if they're in the system, how do we keep them from progressing up in the system, if you will, and more serious offenses, and that it's a good thing when we have alternatives to the traditional system, and that we are, I think most prosecutors' offices are very conscious of doing the right thing. That's what we talk about, that we are ministers of justice, and we try to do the right thing and handle the case in an appropriate way. And I hope that people can trust the system. I think there's a lot of mistrust, and I would hope that we can gain that trust as we continue to pursue some reform in the system.
Very good. Go ahead, Ruby.
It's not an either or. We don't have to pit public safety against a more fair, more effective system that provides safety and equity and fairness for all in the community, and that experienced law enforcement leaders recognize that, and that it's important that people appreciate that we need to pursue both for true public safety.
Nice. Chief?
I'll simply say that police reform really is about how we treat our most vulnerable populations. And that should be the true measure of any society or anyone in leadership. Remembering why we got into criminal justice in the first place was to use the system to create a more just society, and understanding that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is generosity. And so we use our talents to make life better for other people so our jobs will be meaningful. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief. DA McCann, thank you. Ruby and Ames, thank you for joining us. And thank you, audience, for participating and asking questions to us. You can find out more about this topic on brennancenter.org. And we look forward to seeing you next time on our next event. You can go to there to sign up for our newsletters as well. So thank you for joining us. I'm Natalie Tennant, former Secretary of State of West Virginia. Have a good day.